So when it comes to Chernobyl, I feel like they've been spoon feeding us this story of what happened during this disaster ever since it happened. I feel like we haven't gotten the full story as to what happened, and also the continuing story of the effects of what happened and transpired throughout history, throughout time. What has happened with this place? Like, we know the effects it had, the effects it continues to have, but like I said, it's so much more to this than meets the eye, than they're telling us. So I'm always looking for new information. This video here is titled "The Red Truck Inside Reactor Number 4 and the 5 Mysterious Machines of Chernobyl." Let's check it out.
In the immediate aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster, as the world watched in horror, a new and equally terrifying battle began, one against an invisible, insidious enemy radiation. Among the unsung heroes of this battle were the crews of the Mi-26 helicopters, monstrous machines that flew into the heart of the radioactive maelstrom, tasked with decontaminating the irradiated landscape and containing the nuclear threat. The Mi-26 is the heaviest and most powerful helicopter ever to be put into serial production. Originally designed for military use, it was intended to transport heavy equipment, such as armored vehicles and missile systems, to remote areas. But in the summer of 1986, the Mi-26 found itself repurposed for a grim new mission, spraying a sticky polymeric substance known as Borda over the contaminated soil of Chernobyl. The Borda, a dark, viscous mixture, was developed to bind radioactive dust to the ground, preventing it from being carried by the wind and spreading further contamination. The Mi-26S, a specially modified version of the helicopter, was equipped with 4 additional tanks, holding over 14,000 liters of this substance. From heights of just 60 to 70 meters, the Mi-26S would fly at speeds of 50 to 60 kilometers per hour, its under-fuselage sprayers creating a 12-meter wide swath of the sticky film. The work was grueling and dangerous, requiring up to 30 passes over the same area to achieve the necessary coverage.
Yo, looking at this, when we had that chemical plant explosion here in Atlanta, down in like I think it was the Conyers area, and that whole thing happened, man, this is all I could think about was, oh my gosh, do we have another Chernobyl happening on our hands? And we still don't know the full effects of what just transpired there anyway, and we probably won't know till years down the line how it affected people, who all it affected, the long-term effects and all of that stuff. But Chernobyl was on my mind, man. And it's like, are we just sitting waiting on another one of these to happen? Because it can.
On June 25th, 1986, the first Mi-26 took to the skies over Chernobyl, its crew fully aware of the lethal radiation that permeated the air. Despite the protective screens installed in the cockpit and the filter system designed to shield them from the worst of the exposure, each flight was a perilous gamble. The helicopter's massive rotors churned up radioactive dust with every pass, and even with lead plates lining the cockpit floor, the crew could not escape the relentless bombardment of gamma rays. In addition to spraying Borda, Mi-26s also served in critical operations to install large objects on the roofs of the remaining power units. In one particularly tense mission, an Mi-26 was tasked with placing a dome-shaped lid, urgently manufactured to cover the exposed reactor. The conditions were so extreme that after each mission, the helicopters had to be thoroughly decontaminated at makeshift field stations. Even so, the Mi-26s became so radioactive that some were deemed too dangerous to continue flying. These helicopters, having served their purpose, were sent to the helicopter graveyard in Rossica, a desolate field where irradiated machinery was abandoned to rust away. After witnessing the immense challenges faced by the crews flying the Mi-26 during the Chernobyl cleanup, it's clear that whether you're dealing with the fallout of a disaster or just navigating life's everyday pressures, the right tools and support can make all the difference. And when it comes to mental well-being, today's sponsor, BetterHelp. On the night of April 25th, 1986, a red Mercedes-Benz truck idled silently beneath the steel canopy of Chernobyl's turbine hall. This was no ordinary vehicle. It was a mobile vibration lab, packed with state-of-the-art diagnostic tools and mounted on the sturdy chassis of a Mercedes-Benz LK or LN truck from West Germany. The Kharkiv turbine plant acquired the lab in late 1985. Designed by the Swiss firm Vibrometer, it analyzed the most minute tremors within the rotors and bearings of turbines. Earlier that day, it had been driven into the heart of Reactor 4's operations, at the request of the plant's chief engineer. Turbine Units 7 and 8 of Reactor 4 were experiencing unsatisfactory vibrations, and a scheduled maintenance shutdown provided the opportunity for measurements. But as midnight passed, the routine turned into a nightmare. With their Mercedes-Benz lab stationed between the problematic turbines, 3 engineers from the Kharkiv plant, Vladimir Savinkov, Georgy Popov, and Alexander Kabanov, began their tests. As they worked, the reactor that powered these turbines was being gradually shut down, according to the Ministry of Energy's schedule. Then, without warning, something went horribly wrong. At 1:23 a.m., a catastrophic explosion ripped through Reactor 4. The force of the blast shattered the turbine hull, collapsing the roof and nearly burying the lab under a mountain of debris. Radiation levels soared to lethal heights. Yet amidst the chaos, the Kharkiv engineers did not flee. Instead, they joined the plant's operational staff in a desperate effort to prevent further explosions and contain the fire. It was a valiant, if ultimately futile, attempt to save not only their vehicle, but also the lives of those still inside the plant. Savinkov, the first to show symptoms of radiation sickness, was led out by Popov and Kabanov. They joined others in an evacuation that tragically exposed them to even more radiation. By the time they were airlifted...
That's brave to do, bro. Especially when you know you got families at home, wife, kids that need you, and you put your life on the line, pretty much risk your life, have your life taken, so that it doesn't spread or continue to get worse. Like, I can't do nothing but tip my hat to those guys, bro. And it's not the type of stuff, this is the type of stuff you think about working in these areas, but you never think something like this is gonna happen. I'll be honest to tell you, bro, I worked around at a plant with boilers and reactors and different things like that, fam. And you hear them talking about what could happen in safety meetings and different things like that. And you hear that stuff, but for something like this to happen, you never think it'll happen.
To Moscow's 6th Clinical Hospital, the diagnosis was grim. Savinkov and Popov had contracted acute radiation sickness of the most severe degree. Kabanov's condition, though serious, was slightly less dire. Vladimir Savinkov succumbed to radiation sickness on May 21st. He was buried in Kharkiv, his body encased in a lead coffin. Georgy Popov followed on June 13th and was laid to rest among other Chernobyl victims at Matinsko Cemetery in Moscow. Kabanov, though severely affected, managed to survive, returning to Kharkiv with permanent disabilities. A large group of plant workers attended Popov's funeral. During the memorial service, the chief designer announced that once recovered and decontaminated, the vibration lab would be named in honor of the young men who sacrificed their lives trying to save it. In 1987, the Mercedes-Benz lab, the focus of their final efforts, was finally extracted from the rubble. However, due to severe contamination, it was deemed unsalvageable and was buried in an unknown location. In the years that followed, the story of the Kharkiv engineers and their ill-fated mission was largely forgotten, lost in the shadows of larger narratives. It wasn't until decades later that their names, Savinkov, Popov, and Kabanov, were finally honored, and they were posthumously awarded the Order for Courage by the Ukrainian government. Barrage balloons. Amid the desolation of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, strange shapes hovered in the sky. By day, they were barely visible against the gray Ukrainian sky, but as night fell, they transformed into ghostly orbs, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. These were no ordinary balloons. They were relics of a bygone war, repurposed to aid in one of the most desperate engineering feats of the 20th century, the construction of the sarcophagus over Reactor 4. It was a Herculean effort, requiring thousands of workers, known as liquidators, to brave lethal levels of radiation. The urgency of the situation meant that work had to be done around the clock, including at night. Adequate lighting became a critical task given to these holdovers from World War II, the barrage balloons. Initially designed to deter enemy aircraft, barrage balloons were typically filled with hydrogen and tethered to the ground by steel cables around critical infrastructure. The idea was simple. By raising these balloons to certain heights, they created a deadly obstacle for low-flying aircraft, forcing them to fly higher and aimed at the range of anti-aircraft guns. These same balloons now found a new life at Chernobyl. Filled with over 2,000 cubic meters of helium, the balloons were tethered around the construction site of the sarcophagus and connected to power generators. Attached to them were 40-kilowatt lamps, powerful enough to pierce the thick radioactive dust that hung in the air. The liquidators, with a grim sense of humor, nicknamed them lustra, or chandeliers. The work they illuminated was grueling. High radiation levels meant that direct interaction with the sarcophagus components was nearly impossible. Much of the construction had to be done remotely, with robots and cranes.
And the crazy part is, like, you still hear to this day that there are a lot of areas there that still have high radiation levels. Equipment that have it trapped in it, on it, however you want to put it, still have high radiation levels attached to it. So it's like, yeah, that place there, I don't think it'll ever get right. Unless some, like, asteroid comes and just puts a big hole there and it just has to start over. But even at that, I don't know, I still think you'll find some radiation.
Yet, even in these extreme conditions, the balloons floated silently above. The 24-hour construction schedule allowed the sarcophagus to be built in just 206 days under conditions that defied belief. It encased 200 tons of radioactive corium, 30 tons of highly contaminated dust, and 16 tons of uranium and plutonium. As for the balloons, their role, though fleeting, was vital. Once the construction was complete, these floating chandeliers, having absorbed dangerous levels of radiation, were unceremoniously buried, like so much of the contaminated debris from Chernobyl. The toy tank. In the chaos and devastation of the Chernobyl disaster, an unexpected hero emerged. It wasn't clad in a lead-lined suit, nor was it a cutting-edge piece of Soviet engineering. It was a small plastic toy, a tank purchased from a children's store in Kiev. This humble machine would become the first functional robot in the deadly environment of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. As the disaster unfolded, the Soviet Union scrambled to contain the catastrophe, deploying its brightest minds and most advanced technologies. Among them was Alexander A. Borovoy, an atomic physicist from the Kurchatov Institute in Moscow. Arriving at the disaster site on April 29th, he was tasked with helping to measure and control the release of lethal radioactive materials. Robotics engineers, initially hailed as heroes of Chernobyl in the press, faced devastating setbacks. The advanced robots, designed to traverse the reactor's irradiated corridors, quickly succumbed to the intense radiation. In one failed attempt, a robot became stuck on a minor obstacle, a metal tube no more than 5 inches in diameter. 2 workers risked their lives to lift the robot over the tube, only for it to malfunction, roll down the wrong corridor, and topple over for a final time. Witnessing these failures, Borovoy and his colleagues knew they needed a different approach, something simpler, more resilient. During a trip to Kyiv, a colleague stumbled upon a toy tank in a store called Everything for Children. Priced at just 12 rubles, about $5, the tank was a far cry from the sophisticated machinery the team had been relying on. Yet, its simplicity proved to be its greatest strength. The toy was quickly adapted for its new mission. Its short cable was replaced with a longer 10-meter multi-channel cable, and it was outfitted with a dosimeter, a thermometer, and a strong flashlight in place of the gun barrel. This rudimentary robot could now navigate around the debris-strewn corridors of the reactor, providing crucial data from areas too dangerous for humans to enter. Borovi described the tank as an extraordinary hunting dog, leading the way through the radioactive ruins. For nearly a year, from 1986 until the spring of 1987, the tank operated reliably, until it became too contaminated and was buried in the radioactive rubble. Reflecting on this unlikely hero, Borovi later wrote a simple acknowledgement in his memoirs. "Thank you, small tank." The Moonwalkers. Of the many robots used in the Chernobyl cleanup, the STR-1, known to many as the Moonwalker, had perhaps the most interesting backstory. This specialized transport robot was a direct descendant of the Lunokhod lunar rovers, which had traversed the surface of the Moon during the early 1970s. Lunokhod 1, launched in 1970, was the first remote-controlled robot to land on another celestial body. It traveled over 10 kilometers, sent back thousands of images, and conducted scientific experiments that provided invaluable data about the Moon. Its successor, Lunokhod 2, pushed even further, setting records for extraterrestrial distance traveled, which would stand for decades. In the aftermath of Chernobyl, Soviet engineers, drawing on the experience gained from the Lunokhod program, adapted the technology to meet the dire needs of the disaster site. The result was the STR-1, a robust machine capable of withstanding the extreme radiation levels that far exceeded anything the Lunokhods had encountered on the Moon. The robot was designed to clear debris, remove highly radioactive materials, and perform tasks too dangerous for human workers. Constructed in less than 2 months, the STR-1 was engineered to withstand exposure to gamma radiation levels that would be lethal to humans within minutes. Its electronic circuits were encased in a lead-shielded container, and its cameras were fitted with radiation-resistant glass, allowing it to operate in conditions that would be deadly to humans. The robot's titanium and alloy frame was coated with radiation-resistant paint, and its hermetically sealed wheels, equipped with individual electromechanical actuators and independent suspension, enabled it to navigate the debris-strewn terrain of the reactor's roof with remarkable maneuverability. To ensure the STR-1 could endure the harsh environment, engineers implemented several protective features, including sealed electrical connections, relays, contactors, and radiation-resistant lubricants in the traction drives. The STR-1 was first deployed on the roof of Chernobyl's reactor number 3 in August 1986. It faced a daunting task. The roof was covered in graphite blocks, fuel rods, and other debris, all emitting lethal doses of radiation. The robot's job was to push this material off the roof, where it could be safely collected and buried. Operators guided it remotely from a safe distance, using video feeds from the robot's onboard cameras.
And see, I was always under the impression after the explosion happened and the radiation was released and everything, that it was abandoned and that was it. I never knew all of this stuff had taken place. That's why I said, man, there's so much more to this story, so many more layers that we don't know about that took place either during the explosion and right after or a little time after that. It's so much more to it, man. I feel like I said, they've been spoon-feeding us and not giving us everything.
But the environment at Chernobyl was unforgiving. Radiation levels on the roof reached as high as 10,000 roentgens per hour, far beyond what the STR-1's components had been designed to handle. Despite its rugged construction, the robot began to experience failures. Its electronic circuits, shielded by lead and encased in radiation-resistant materials, were slowly being fried by the relentless bombardment of gamma rays. Yet, in its short operational life, the STR-1 accomplished much. It removed over 90 tons of radioactive debris, work that would have otherwise required the exposure of up to 1,000 human workers.
Hopefully, in the next couple years, we have more people come forward and tell their story of their interactions or abductions that they had with aliens, bro. You know what I mean? I hate for anybody to go through that, but if they have, then I hope there's a safe space for them to come speak out and tell their experiences. This video here is an interview with an alien abduction victim from Alberta, Canada in 1967.
The following incident took place around 6:30 p.m. on November the 7th, 1967 in Alberta, Canada. 13-year-old David Seawold was coming home from a friend's house. It was late autumn, and David decided to take a shortcut across a field, a journey that should have taken him a few minutes. Suddenly David heard a high-pitched noise and saw a silver-grey object in the sky. As he studied the object, he noticed that there were coloured lights dotted around the centre that were flashing on and off. The next thing he knew, he was running up to his front door in a blind panic as if someone were chasing him, and raced up to his bedroom. His older sister Angela found him hiding under the bed in a state of shock. She asked him what's wrong and why was he so late. He said he'd been chased by a flying saucer and described what the craft looked like, but could not remember the entire incident or account for the missing time. The walk from his friend's house should have taken him about 3 minutes, and David was usually never late, but he had somehow lost 35 minutes. David normally had an easygoing nature, but the incident had left him tense and nervous. When they later asked for more details about his experience with the UFO, he found there were many details he could not recall, only that it was following him. A few months later, in April 1968, David had a nightmare and was violently struggling in his sleep. After waking up, he came to the realization what had happened in the field with the UFO 5 months previously. The nightmare had brought memories to the surface, and David now remembers being taken aboard the craft and subjected to a physical examination by strange-looking beings that were vastly different in appearance to humans. His nightmare was so realistic that David was in no doubt that it was an accurate recollection of what had happened during his missing time. His parents were so concerned about his story that they contacted UFO researcher and investigator W.K. Allen from Clownell in British Columbia. Allen hosted a UFO-related show on the local radio station CFCN AM in Calgary, and they'd known about Allen after hearing him discuss flying saucers on his show. Allen visited them on Sunday, November the 19th, and interviewed David. Unfortunately, David wasn't able to recall any new information, only that it had chased him as he walked across the open field. In order to get to the bottom of what happened, Allen suggested to his parents that David undergo regressive hypnosis to help unlock what had really happened to him that day in 1967. When David was first regressed, it released such terror and trauma for the teenager that it caused a mental block. When he was asked what had happened after he saw the craft, he was unable to speak and his legs shook violently, so they had to proceed at a very slow pace in order for David to release his terror. When David regained his composure, they repeated the same question, which caused another spasm of terror. Allen had attended the hypnotic sessions and was convinced by David's reactions, and had indeed undergone some sort of traumatic experience. Not quite certain of what David was experiencing, and no doubt skeptical about his story, the hypnotist suggested that perhaps he'd been late that evening because he was up to some mischief with his friend and devised a UFO tale as a cover-up. David had a fairly placid nature, but hearing what it suggested made him angry and hostile, and was adamant that he was telling the truth. After a few more sessions, the hypnotist decided to change his approach and found a way to circumvent David's horror of reliving the confrontation. Now under the supervision of a Dr. Masson, psychologist at the University of Calgary, David was filmed whilst under hypnosis. They suggested to David to relive his experience as if he was looking at television, because looking at a drama on a screen cannot hurt you. As they
No, man, sometimes that's why we block it out, because we don't want to relive that. Like this method could really backfire on them. and he could really go into like shutdown mode, or he could like snap and go crazy. Like, I don't know, but they're the experts, I guess.
Proceeded with the experiment, Dr. Masson proceeded to ask David a series of questions while he was under deep hypnotic recall. Doctor: David, I would like you to see yourself on the 19th of November last year. You can visualize that. You can see yourself there. Will you tell me where you are? David: I'm in the empty lot. All right, look around and tell me everything that you see. I see an object in the sky above me. What colour is the object? Silver greyish. It has a coloured band of lights around the middle of it. All colours: green, yellow, blue, orange, red, pink. What happens next? They put an orange beam on me. Where does the beam come from? The ship. What part of the ship? The middle, on the bottom. How did you feel when the beam touched you? I was sort of in a trance. Earlier, David had stated under hypnosis that when he saw the beam coming down, he felt frightened. Now he was describing a second reaction after it touched him and he was being pulled up into the ship. Doctor: did the beam grab hold of your arms or did it grab hold of your body? What does the beam do to you? David: it pulled me up on the ship. How did it bring you up? Like you were going up an elevator? No. Did you feel a funny sensation as you were going up? No. Were you frightened? No. I was in a trance. Did you scream? No. All right, keep telling me what's going on. The beam is bringing me up to the ship now. I see a monster. Tell me about the monster. It has scaly skin. It has holes for its nose and holes for its ears, and it has a slit on its face for a mouth. It's brown. Well, how many monsters do you see? 2. What made you think that the skin was scaly? What was there about the skin that made you think it was scaly? It looked like a crocodile skin. It's sort of rough all over. What did their backs look like? Did they have a crocodile back too? I never saw their backs. Did they have any clothes on? No, just that sort of skin. Were they smiling? No. Were they angry? No. Were they happy? No. They didn't show any expression. Tell me everything that's happening now. They put me in a sort of cot. He's looking at my body. What about your body? He's studying it. He took all my clothes off. All right, David, now what is happening? They're bringing me through a hallway into another room. What does the other room look like? It has all sorts of bright lights in it. What else do you see? There's another table there. They put me on the table. And now, David, he's lifting my head up. He's lifting it up. His voice is extremely frightened and plaintive, as if wanting to escape from something. He looks at my hair and my eyes and my nose. Now David's breathing rises and falls with gasps and sobs as he relives that terrifying moment. How many are looking at you? 4. What are they like? They all look the same. Can you tell me something more about their faces? It's sort of scary. What about their heads? It's round. How many hands do they have? 2. Are the hands very similar to yours? No, they're like real rough. How many fingers do they have?
But we cannot lie, there are a lot of similarities. So it's often like they're updating their system as to how they be able to look like us so they can walk amongst us without ever getting noticed. That's what this feels like they're doing to them.
4. Do they have a thumb as well? No. How big are these beings? About 6 feet. What are they wearing? It looks like they're not wearing anything. They have a brown sort of scaly skin-like. How many feet do they have? 2. There's nothing on their feet. How many toes do you see on their feet? 4. What else do you notice about them that's unusual? They only have 4 fingers. They have holes for their ears and nose and a slit for their mouth. Are they saying anything to you? I can't understand. Why can't you understand? It's a strange language. He's not speaking in English? No. Imitate the sound these beings are saying. David makes a long buzzing or humming sound, much like a giant bee or some type of machinery. Dr. Masson asks him to repeat it in case they could detect a pattern which might be deciphered. Doctor, and who's saying this? David, just one of them. He's telling the others. What is he doing while he's saying this? He's looking at my body. Have you ever been on a table like that before? Yes. Where? In an operating room. What's going on now? You're on the table? And David pauses, breathing heavily. As if not wanting to remember, the psychologist repeats the question, telling the hypnotized boy that he will be comfortable and not frightened by anything that he sees. They put this other thing over me. What other thing? What does it look like? It's a greyish colour, and they just throw it over me, and then this great big huge orange coloured light comes down and is shown on me. Then one of them took a sort of needle. It's grey, it's small. He sticks it in my arm. Were you awake all the time when you were in this room? Yes. Did they give you anything to eat or drink? No. I was sort of in a trance. How did you feel in that trance?
Yeah, if that was ever me, they better put me in a trance too. Because then you start operating on my body, I'm going to look at you and be like, all right, man, well, how about y'all cure some of the things that ail me? How about y'all do that? While y'all doing whatever it is that you're doing, at least help me out. Do something helpful for my body. Like, what?
State. I felt funny. I felt numb. And what goes on now? Then they put my clothes on again. They wheeled me out and they beamed me down. Where do you get down? In the empty lot. Just before you saw the ship, what were you doing? I'm walking. Do you hear anything? Yes, a high-pitched sound. And what do you do when you hear it? I look up and I see this grey, silvery greyish object. How big is the object? About as big as a house. And how far is it off the ground? Oh, about 30 to 40 feet. What do you notice about this object? It has coloured lights around the middle which melt together. Do you feel any wind, any vibration? Just the wind. What reaction do you have? I'm frightened. Now, I would like you to come back to the time just before you see this ship and before you hear the high-pitched sound. What are you doing? How are you feeling? What are you thinking? I was coming from my friend's house. I felt great. I wasn't thinking about anything. Now, right after the beam has pulled you up and everything, we're right back and the object had disappeared. Now what's going on? I start to run home. And how do you feel as you run home? Frightened. Is there any other feeling that you have? I'm scared, frightened. I feel numb all over. Is there any part of your body that feels different from in any other part of your body? Yes, my head, like it was twirling around. And how do your legs feel? Numb. I'm going to wake you now. You're back at the present. After you wake up, you'll...
Ooh. They could be using us and different parts of us or organs or something from us to heal some of theirs. So it could be the direct reverse effect. Like, I don't know, but they're doing something.
You'll be wide awake. You'll be alert. You'll be confident. You'll feel fine. All the hypnotic aggression sessions with David Sewell were videotaped, but efforts by people to obtain copies of transcripts of the experiment have been denied.